ガーデニングショップ結構流行ってたのに、どうしてまたお菓子屋さんなんかにしたの？
Lady, do you even bother to keep up with modern economics? Cold opener for this one featured the introduction of Momoko's fairy partner, which, oh yeah, these things were characters too, weren't they? Like seriously, I don't even remember them playing any sort of major role in the final arc of Sharp, much less even appear in the final episode. Anyway, her name was Nini, and I'm sure this episode will be able to flesh her out as well as the other fairies a little more, maybe with a little adventure between them and...
Nope.
Yeah, in spite of the fact that this was the cold opener, which are usually meant to establish what an episode is going to be all about, the fairies actually only played a very minor role in this one, if you could even call it that. Granted, it's not the biggest issue ever, but it is a bit of a sign of what to expect from this one. Anyway, the episode proper opened with the Ojamajo making their way to school before encountering Kotake. He wanted his classmates, in particular Aiko, to join his soccer club. They, understandably, weren't too interested. Pretty sure that's just a general opinion of soccer. Of course, he also just had to slip in a Doremi disc while he was at it, to which she got upset. Well, okay, so now this is going to be more of a Kotake episode where he learns about respecting Doremi a little more and...
No, not exactly.
I mean, yeah, unlike the fairies, we will actually be coming back to this plot point, but only much later, but you'll see what I mean. Also, Doremi of course did the whole I'll make my own club routine, which she proposed a steak club, which, well, a cooking club could be a thing too. Anyway, the episode thankfully started to get a little more organized once the Ojamajo got to the Mahodo. They started prepping for their grand opening, with them trying to make some cookies to sell, but things didn't go so well. That's what you kids get for using one of those newfangled confectionery dairy ovens or whatever you call them. But yeah, I actually really like this whole montage of the Ojamajo going through a little trial and error before stumbling upon the ideal recipes and cooking preparations for their products. Though of course, in the end, it all came down to love and a whole lot of that thing from their magical grinders. Okay girls, there's enough of the stuff on those cookies to make Ozzy Osbourne OD. I'll apologize ahead of time if this joke just so happens to age poorly as we upload it. But yeah, I also liked how even after the second batch of slightly less failed cookies, they didn't throw them away, and instead figured they could use them in other recipes like as toppings or bases for cakes. It's a good way of teaching how not to waste food and problem solving, so yeah, good stuff there. Also, the fairies did do something for this episode by helping wrap some candy, which was cute and also kind of fun in the sort of classic cartoon way of seeing the little workers making a ton of products. With their prep mostly done, they started to hand out flyers for their shop, including to Seki. And as their teacher, she did want to meet with the adult owner of their bakery to make sure they weren't breaking any sort of child labor laws, which they totally were doing, and yeah, maybe I should actually retract that compliment I just gave. Fortunately, Majorika had thought ahead and invited Majorika to be at the grand opening of her bakery, which, yeah, makes sense. I mean, unless we're talking about a massive, faceless corporate entity, most owners would show up to the opening of their new locations. It also gave the old witch an opportunity to share an album with Momoko of her time with Majo Monroe, who she referred to as her senpai. There were also these girls who carried pictures of her around all the time, so I guess she was particularly popular with them. But yeah, a nice little bit of continuity that further fleshes out Majo Monroe. This included how she had been offered the opportunity to join some of the higher up witches, like the ones from the first episode of the season, but chose the simple life over politics, which yeah, is probably the wisest choice ever. Meanwhile, Opa managed to promote their shop through her radio show, which I'm not entirely sure if she could do that, considering how ridiculously oppressive some legit idol contracts are. And if you think I'm being overly dramatic, well... It's almost as if a toy exec walked into the show. Regardless, it did work out, and her cookies quickly sold out. Stan culture in a nutshell. However, she continued to do some unsanctioned idol work and promised handshakes to anyone who bought any of their sweets. As a result, all the Ojamajo's cookies sold out, sans Doremi for no other reason except that this episode really seemed to hate her. Seriously, everyone from Majorika to their own teachers just refused to eat her cookies. And while the former was understandable because Grumpy Toad, as well as Seki for reasons we'll see in a sec, it just doesn't make too much sense for the Ompu stands who were mostly buying cookies for the handshake to actively avoid hers. I guess it was because they turned out a little ugly, but again, beggars can't be choosers. Anyway, going back to the Seki thing, the third act of the episode just kind of shifted gears to suddenly being all about her. Yeah, while she and the Ojamajo's classmates stopped in to check in on them, Seki refused to eat everyone's cookies, so at least she was being equally prejudiced against sweets. Curious, Doremi decided to follow her and donned her hamster disguise again to spy at her at home and discovered the obvious secret that she was on a diet. Specifically, she wanted to look good for Kitagawa from the last season, whom she had maintained a long-distance relationship with. Thus, the Ojamajo decided to include some low-calorie options for their bakery for both their teacher and regular customers' sakes. And for their first healthier option, they decided to go with cheesecake. Which, needless to say, that is an abomination against all humanity. Hey, I don't make the rules, it's just a cold hard fact that cheesecake should never be unhealthy. Okay, but seriously, I don't know of many bakeries with healthier options, at least in my area, or how successful they would be, so do feel free to let me know in the comments. But again, if you ever try to get me to eat low-fat cheesecake, well, we just can't be friends. That said, this show didn't really explain, at all how they were going to go about making their low-calorie desserts, like the cheesecake. While, again, I can't approve of it, they could have said stuff like they were going to use alternative ingredients, like low-fat cream cheese or sweeteners instead of pure sugar, but I guess they just didn't have the time, as along with the Seki stuff, they also had to resolve Doremi's cookie subplot. As a result, both stories just kind of resolved themselves. Seki got a call from Kitagawa, assuring her that he didn't care if she was a little plump, hell, dudes kind of go for that stuff, and Kotake and his hungry soccer team just bought all of her cookies, and I guess that made up for his earlier rude comments, even though he's barely been in this episode, so... The end! Yeah, even when not comparing this to what came immediately prior, this was just kind of a meh episode. Don't get me wrong, there's good stuff here, mostly in the middle, with them showing the Ojamajo getting ready for their opening day, and there is a good message here about how every particular product will have its consumers. However, the disjointedness of the rest of the episode just kinda took it down a few pegs in my book. I think Matt Stone and Trey Parker put it best when they talked about how they wrote for South Park, in that they did try to avoid stories where they would have to use the phrase "and then" as much as possible, because using that would suggest that one event didn't directly flow into the other, and at times weren't even related to the rest of the story. This was, unfortunately, kind of the case with everything before the title card. Nini didn't really do anything in this episode, and while Kotaki's subplot would return at the end, the fact that he didn't play any other part in this episode made his sort of apology to Doremi fall flat. Now, the middle part of the episode was actually kind of fun and interesting, as we got to see the Ojamajo try to set up their new shop by both doing some prep work and even advertising. Stuff like that is endearing, in spite of everyone crapping on Doremi's cookies, which, yeah, I get that's her gimmick, but when everyone does it throughout the episode for no real reason, you kind of get the Squidward effect, in that it just becomes unfunny and even a little unpleasant. She did eventually find some guys who'd appreciate her unique cookies, but geez, did she have to go through some crap to get there. Meanwhile, the Seki subplot was just kind of weird, as it could have been its own solo episode, and yet both that and Kotake ended up getting rushed by the end. Thus, and while part of this episode was quite good, it overall came out to being pretty disjointed, leading to just an okay episode. Maybe like their episodes, they really should try to cut out the fat from these scripts. With all of our side projects done, we can probably get back to working on the next part of the Max Heart reviews. Though don't expect it too quick, as this season we are also adding 2 more weekly reviews just to give this channel a little more variety. We will still try to work on the Precure stuff, but we can't give any solid timetable just yet. Still look forward to it. Until then though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, there's a cheesecake in the freezer that needs to be defrosted. And yes, it has all of the calories.